Hey everyone, welcome, and a special hello to all our friends around the world. If this is your first time here, we're honored to have you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Back in the year 280 BC, the ruler of Egypt at the time, Ptolemy II, commissioned an Egyptian priest named Manetho to collect and document the history of Egypt up until the time of Alexander the Great.
For decades, I worked tirelessly, gathering and studying ancient documents from libraries, temples, archives, and even foreign sources, especially from the temples of Heliopolis, which was known as On in ancient texts.
He managed to categorize and chronicle all aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization and presented his work in two books, The History of Egypt and Egyptiaca. But here's the fascinating part. According to those books, and based on the oldest library records in the world, Manetho claimed that the Egyptian civilization goes back more than 36,000 years. According to the traditional timeline we've been taught, Egyptian history officially begins with King Narmer, who unified Upper and Lower Egypt around 3200 BC. Before that, there were scattered societies and isolated kingships dating back to what scholars refer to as the water from water era, which is kind of an obscure or symbolic reference to early prehistory. Civilizations like Naqada, Badari, Fayum, and others are included in that early phase. But after 2 centuries of research by Egyptian scholars, there's now solid evidence that Egypt's history could go much further back than we ever imagined. Manetho of Sebennytos, often referred to by archaeologists and historians as the true father of Egyptian history, was once overshadowed by the Greek historian Herodotus, who was long praised as the main source of knowledge about ancient Egypt. For generations, we repeated the idea that Herodotus was the genius who introduced us to our ancient legacy. But by the mid-20th century, that narrative changed. New evidence made it clear. Manetho, not Herodotus, was the greatest historian Egypt ever had.
He earned the royal commission from me because of his deep expertise in writing and interpreting ancient Egyptian texts in all dialects.
He was fluent in hieroglyphics, Demotic script, which was used in temples, and Greek, so he had no problem understanding or translating old texts. He was highly trusted by the Ptolemaic court. In fact, Ptolemy I had previously tasked him with promoting the cult of Serapeum, a deity meant to bridge Egyptian and Greek religious beliefs. Thanks to this trust, Manetho produced his 2 famous works, The History of Egypt, a fully independent historical record that traces Egypt's civilization back 36,000 years, and Egyptiaca, a more narrative-based version that mixes history with myth and popular stories.
In the end, after I had studied deeply and traveled through the lands of many peoples and seen what they left behind, I decided to write a full summary of the history of Egypt, its gods, dynasties, and rulers, from Narmer up to Alexander's arrival in Egypt.
Not only did Manetho write with precision and professionalism comparable to modern 11th century historians, but he was also a master of his craft. Unfortunately, very little is known about his life, including when he was born or died. The main reason for this is tragic. The only known copy of his History of Egypt was destroyed when the Library of Alexandria was burned. That brings us to the library itself. Ptolemy I is believed to have founded the Library of Alexandria around 330 BC, and it was greatly expanded under Ptolemy II. It grew into an enormous institution, housing over 700,000 scrolls. These included texts on science, economics, and history from around the world, making it the largest public library in human history, a destination for scholars from all over the globe. But in 48 BC, during the conflict between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, a large part of the library was destroyed by fire. Some historians believe this was nearly a total loss, while others say parts of it were rebuilt afterward, but no one knows exactly when the reconstruction might have happened. Then, in 391 AD, the library suffered more damage during the rule of Emperor Theodosius I, who enforced anti-pagan laws. And some later historians argue that what remained of the library was completely destroyed in 640 AD during the Muslim conquest of Egypt under Amr ibn al-As, following the orders of Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. However, many scholars strongly reject this claim, saying there's no reliable evidence linking the Muslims to the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. They consider this story more of a myth or legend. For example, Gustave Le Bon, a well-known historian, wrote that the library was fully burned down during Julius Caesar's campaign in 48 BC, and that's when it was really lost. Whether it was in the year 44 BC or a little before or after, the fire destroyed most of the earlier records, including the very ones that Manetho used for his book. Some historians mention that there was another copy of Manetho's work stored at the Serapeum temple in Alexandria, but that copy too was burned during the early Christian era. At the time, many liberal thinkers saw books on history and philosophy as a threat to the prevailing religious beliefs about creation, which dominated Christian thought back then. Yet, even with that opposition, some Christian clergy were actually interested in these writings, especially those that spoke about creation, physics, and literature. Manetho's writings were among them. Later historians who had access to parts of Manetho's work began quoting and building upon his insights. One of them was Josephus, the famous Jewish historian. His Hebrew name was Yosef ben Matityahu. He lived in the 1st century BC and wrote a book called Against Apion, where he defended the Jewish people from the claims of the Alexandrian writer Apion.
In my work, I tried to glorify my people by referencing parts of Manetho's writings to support my arguments.
The second most well-known historian to quote Manetho was Julius Africanus, who lived between the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. He wrote a historical chronicle titled Chronographiae, where he claimed that the world was only about 5,500 years old. Even though Africanus mentioned Manetho's history of Egypt, he only included the parts that matched his own views on the age of civilization. Still, he acknowledged that, according to Manetho, ancient Egypt was the first truly unified nation in history.
I also referred to Manetho's writings in my own book on Egyptian history. I claimed that scientific civilization in Egypt began 33,000 years before King Narmer.
Manetho's history of Egypt became the only surviving source after the fire that destroyed the Library of Alexandria and wiped out most of the ancient records of human civilization. His book covered Egyptian history from the earliest times up to around 300 BC, including Egypt's scientific and historical achievements. One of the most important aspects of Manetho's work is that he was the first to divide Egypt's history into 3 major periods that are still used today: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. He also listed 33 dynasties that ruled Egypt, an outline that is still taught in history textbooks today. However, Manetho's division wasn't just historical, it also had spiritual dimensions. According to his writings, the final chapter of Egyptian civilization was about obedience to the divine. What's strange is that modern Egyptologists and historians still follow Manetho's dynastic divisions, but completely ignore other periods he mentioned, especially the eras before the dynasties even began. In the same book that scholars quote today, Manetho also talks about civilizations that existed long before the gods of Egypt, and that the dynastic period was only the last phase of a much longer history. According to him, there were over 300 kings who ruled Egypt before the first dynasty, divided across 3 earlier epochs, and many of these kings ruled for hundreds of years. Ironically, this ancient period, despite being the most advanced in terms of knowledge and science, is the one most ignored by historians today. Instead, they focus only on the dynastic period, while completely burying the evidence of earlier civilizations that Manetho clearly described. And when scientists and archaeologists are confronted with this information, they either deny it or dismiss it, saying it contradicts the current academic consensus about the age of civilization. So they label it unacceptable in modern scholarship. Strange, isn't it? Is this really about knowledge and evidence, or is it about controlling the narrative, keeping certain discoveries hidden because they don't fit the preferred version of history?
You know, this kind of censorship only started around the 18th century, when Western colonial influence spread into the Middle East, especially in Egypt. But all of this is documented in Manetho's writings and in the works of other ancient historians.
And that's exactly what we'll explore in the upcoming episodes of this series, looking deeper into Manetho's account